So when we talk about leading others, nothing's more important than our relationship with the chief petty officers. I think of it in terms of influence, negotiation, and teamwork. I had a chief that I really respected that worked for me when I was CO of a 210 years ago, and he used to say there was two rules that he had as the chief. One was the chief is always right. And then the second rule, which is a very important corollary to that, is when in doubt, refer to rule number one. And he used to say that everywhere on the ship as he'd run around and people would laugh. He's also the same guy that said, those famous lines about, some of the scariest things you'll ever hear is a seaman that says, hey, I learned this in boot camp, and then they do it. Or an ensign that says, based on my experience, or even a chief, which is even most frightening when a chief says something like, watch this, and then they do something. That was my first introduction to a really good chief petty officer. So in all seriousness, what do they do? What do chief petty officers do, and what's their place in the organization? How do the officers fit in? Well, most of us know chiefs really don't have anything to do, right? Except they have to figure out what needs to be done. They have to figure out when it needs to be done. They have to tell someone to do it. They have to follow up to make sure it is done, only to find out that it wasn't done right. They have to go back and tell someone to do it again, only to find out that then they did it wrong. Then they have to come back and make sure that it's done correctly. All the time they go through this, they're thinking it would have been just easier if they had done it themselves. So besides that, chiefs have nothing to do in this organization. And in essence, the chiefs make the Coast Guard run. They make everything happen. And so the chief petty officers that I've had the best relationships with, I've been able to come to an understanding with them that, hey, there's really two things I need out of you. One is I need you to follow out orders. I need you to make the crew do what they need to do and help me follow through on our responsibilities and the direction to get the job done. But I also need you to tell me when something can't be done. And that's actually really hard. Some people think those are conflicting and completely different notions, but I think they're not. I think you need a chief petty officer that will follow intent and then be able to come back and tell you something can't be done. So for example, I had a great chief that would tell me when we would do flight deck operations late at night on the ship and the crew's getting tired, and I'd say, hey, we have to do this because we've got to be ready, certified to land the helo and get downrange and do the mission. We'd push hard and we would do it. And then sometimes he would come to me and say, hey, sir, the crew's really tired, and if you make us do this, something bad might happen. And so he could do both at the same time. He could go forward and carry out intent and get things done, and he was also not afraid to come tell me when those things could not be done. So that's what I think of when I think of a good chief. Thanks very much.
The experience that I wanted to share with you came very early in my commission career. My assignment out of the academy was to the Coast Guard cutter Absecon as a deck watch officer. And so off I went. One of our earliest patrols in February of 1965 was Ocean Station Bravo. And as you can imagine, Ocean Station Bravo in the winter months is not a enormously pleasant place to be. We were in the middle of the classic plow into it for as long as it takes to get to one end of the Ocean Station assignment, and then turn around and ride the waves all the way back to the other end, turn around and do it again, and turn around and do it again. So we were on the upbound into the seas, and I'm talking about 35 to 40-foot seas. There were three different systems, as I recall at the time, and it was a terribly nightmarish, topsy-turvy kind of a seagoing opportunity to excel at. And as you can imagine, the critical time for those kind of operations is the turn. When you're plowing into those 40-foot seas and have to make the turn 180 degrees to go back the other way. So I was on the mid-watch, and on one occasion, Captain Jack Forster was in the CO's chair on the bridge, had been there literally for 3 or 4 days, which is leadership experience number one. So as it came time for me to make the turn on that mid-watch, I had myself glued to the porthole in the front of the bridge, waiting for the timing necessary to accelerate the outboard shaft on the twin screw WAVP that we were riding. I tried to time the seaway perfectly, gave the rudder command, reached my hand back on the engine order annunciator to accelerate the outboard shaft and help us push through the turn, when in the dark of the bridge, after being on that bridge for about 4 days, Jack Forrester's hand came down on the top of mine, picked it up, and put it over on the correct engine order annunciator. I was about to compete the rudder command by accelerating the inboard shaft as opposed to the outboard shaft, and with not a single word, no one on the bridge throughout this whole episode knew anything about what was going on other than the captain and myself. He picked up my hand, put it over on the correct engine order telegraph, and gave me a little nudge with it to accelerate that correct outboard engine and push us through this very, very difficult and dangerous turn in those 40 or 45-foot seas. So for me that day, I learned an awful lot about leadership. I learned about the responsibilities of command for the safety and well-being of the ship and the crew on board. And I learned even more about the things that could happen or could go wrong if, in fact, you didn't do what you were responsible to do, first of all, trained to do, second of all, and wanted to do for the well-being of the ship and the crew. One of the first vivid leadership lessons I learned as a young officer, I've told that story so as to impart the leadership lesson I received from Captain Jack Forrester to those that I would be in a mentoring position to help them gain confidence in themselves on one hand, but to also gain a sense of responsibility when placed in leadership positions.
When I was captain of the fast response cutter Forrest Rednauer from 2020 to 2022, I had an unusual search and rescue case off the coast of Catalina Island in Southern California. We arrived on scene amid 8 to 10 foot breaking waves, as well as 30 to 35 knot winds, about 80 nautical miles offshore. The distress vessel was a Panga style vessel, which is an open top with more than 20 illegal migrants who had become disabled. The conditions were well out of parameters for our small boat, but during the case, I had significant external pressure to launch based on safety of life at sea concerns. I was very close to launching, but my chiefs and Lee Coxon took me aside and basically said, "Skipper, we can't do this. This is way too dangerous, and if we lose our small boat, we can't help these people anyway." Some of my more junior personnel were pretty energetic, and they wanted to go for it, but I took the advice of my chiefs and said, maybe we can come up with another idea. Eventually, we convinced 2 of the helos that were on scene to eventually begin rescuing people, but they were hesitant to start due to the risks involved. Our assessment of the craft was in no immediate danger, so we all decided to wait until the storm could subside slightly. After several hours and due to hypothermic concerns, the helo began pulling the migrants off the vessel one by one. However, the vessel had now drifted towards another island, and we assessed that it was less than 45 minutes until the vessel would go into the surf and potentially capsize, which would mean almost certain death for the persons remaining on board. The conditions had improved to the point of being borderline for a small boat launch, but we felt we had no choice, so we launched. We successfully rescued all the remaining migrants, but the embarking them was extremely dangerous, involving timing the waves and essentially throwing the hypothermic migrants who could barely stand up to the deck crew. Once that was complete, we recovered our small boat, but the seas were still so bad we nearly lost the small boat. Only a well-timed swell surging the boat into the cutter's notch allowed us to recover. The danger of this operation, even in a moderately reduced sea state, indicated to me that if we had launched at the beginning, when I had thought to go for it, the results more than likely would have been catastrophic. This taught me 4 things. Sometimes Your instincts to render immediate aid are not the best practice if waiting and assessing the situation further might give you a better solution. Know your people. Your junior people might be gung-ho, but if you know that that's their normal tendency, then you can wait appropriately given the circumstances. Listen to your chiefs. You might disagree, but if they're determined, then there's something that you're not seeing. And finally, 4 is know yourself. If you know what you're likely to do in a moment of stress or fatigue, you can weigh it more appropriately and be open to alternative courses of action, which might be safer or more successful.
Leslie Dean High was born in Bristow, Iowa on February 12, 1924. He was raised during the Depression with small-town Midwestern values in a loving family. His father taught him by example the value of hard work, honesty, and compassion for your neighbors. He was a good student and loved to learn. Les discovered love at first sight when he saw Carol Cooper for the first time. The two dated during their high school years and soon became inseparable. Les applied to both the U.S. Naval Academy and the U.S. Coast Guard Academy. So after 2 years of college, Les set off for New London, Connecticut in June of 1943. Les loved his time at the academy. He got good grades. Given his self-discipline, he did very well in the military training. Les married Carol the day he graduated from the academy, and then they started their military life together. Les began his career with 2 short assignments afloat as deck watch officer for the Coast Guard cutters Taney and Acushnet. After 2 years aboard ship, Les got orders to his first command as commanding officer of Coast Guard Lorraine Station Kwajalein in the South Pacific. Les was assigned to attend basic flight training at Pensacola and advanced training at Corpus Christi. Les flew both helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft, every model the Coast Guard had except the C-130 and the B-17. His first flight duty station in San Diego had 3 great years and as many flight hours as he could get in San Diego. After sunny Southern California, Les packed up the growing family and moved to Air Detachment Kodiak, Alaska. Less than a year later, he was recruited by a prospective CO to move with him to Air Station Traverse City, Michigan. As Les thought about his career and what he had learned about leadership, he began to request assignments back to the academy. Fortunately for the family, though, he was forced to take an overseas, quote, hardship, unquote, tour to Air Station Bermuda first. After Bermuda, Les finally got his chance to go back to the academy. Les enjoyed his years at the academy, first as an instructor of navigation, and then as assistant commandant of cadets. But he was most honored to be selected by the class of 1965 as their class advisor. After the academy graduation in 1965, Les headed to his next command, Air Station Savannah. As the holidays approached that year, Les decided that he should write a letter to each member of the academy class of 1965 to see how they were doing. After just 1 short year in Savannah, he was selected to be the project officer for the establishment of a new air training center in Mobile, Alabama. The pace of the Mobile assignment was hectic, but around Thanksgiving, Les decided again to write letters to his class. Thus began his now famous annual project of writing holiday letters to every member of the class. From Mobile, Les was given another command, this time as CO of Air Station Detroit. Then he went on to the National War College. His payback tour was to Coast Guard headquarters as the Chief of Training and Procurement. In his final tour, Les was again in command, this time as the commanding officer of Coast Guard Reserve Training Center, or RTC, Yorktown. While he was there, he spoke to every class that convened, giving them all a little lesson on leadership. It was also at this command where Les earned his most prized accolade, the Jarvis Award, a Navy League award for leadership. What made it most special for him was that he was nominated for the award by his staff and crew. Les retired from the Coast Guard in 1975, but he never retired from his passion for leadership and mentoring. For well over 50 years, he continued his annual project of writing personal letters to every member of the Coast Guard Academy class of 1965 in time for the holidays. Even at age 98, when his eyesight began to fail him, he continued staying in touch each year with a generic letter and personal phone calls. Although he was retired from the Coast Guard, ultimately for more years than he was on active duty, Les always maintained his interest in the service. Through the years, Les had a chance to meet with many senior leaders at various events in San Diego, Washington, D.C., and New London, Connecticut. When he did, he was never bashful about telling them what he thought they were doing right, always acting the mentor, even when unsolicited. Because, as he always said, Les High is a happy guy.